Our opening speaker this morning is Captain Robert B. Chadwick. He is a 1991 graduate of the Naval Academy and began his career as a surface warfare officer. Captain Chadwick has commanded at several levels, including USS Roosevelt and Destroyer Squadron 21. Ashore, he has served as a flag aide and the Deputy Executive Assistant to the Vice Chief of Naval Operations. He holds numerous awards, including Vice Admiral James Bond Stockdale Award for Inspirational Leadership. He currently serves as the 87th Commandant of Midshipmen. Please join me in welcoming Captain Chadwick.
Thanks a lot. All right, well, good morning, everyone, and I'll add my welcome to day 3 of this great conference, and I hope all of you are getting something out of that. Now, I told her to keep the bio short. Some of you here, Commandant and Midshipmen, I know the Midshipmen here know what that is, but for those who don't have a lot of experience with the school, those of you at civilian universities, the superintendent who you heard yesterday, Admiral Carter, would be comparable to the president of the university, and in Commandant, I'm more like a dean of students, but I would argue it's kind of a dean of students on steroids. I'm kind of responsible for the professional development and day-to-day operations of the entire brigade. And in that role, certainly, anytime I've been in a leadership or, have had kind of a command philosophy or an intent, and certainly coming into this role, I felt like I needed to provide an intent to the Brigade of Midshipmen. And yesterday, a number that kept coming up was the number 3. And certainly, not by design, but my intent only has 3 tenets. And when you hear them, they're going to sound familiar because each one of them has come up at various times in the speakers that you've heard over the last 2 days. The 3 are leadership, character, and accountability. And again, you've heard those words on several different occasions, but I want to kind of give you the sense of, my message to the Brigade of Midshipmen on those 3 tenets. Certainly on the leadership piece, it should come as no surprise that we put a real premium on leadership here at the Naval Academy. You could argue that this is somewhat of a leadership laboratory. But we certainly don't feel that we have the corner on the market on leadership development, leadership thought. If we did think we had the corner on the market, there would be no reason to have this conference. We would just shut the gates and talk among ourselves. But that's what makes something like this so powerful, when we get different ideas, different kind of thinking on leadership. I tell the midshipmen that their 4 years here is like a quiver of arrows on their back, and everything that they experience, every leadership position they hold, every leader they encounter, is another arrow in that quiver. And I can tell you, yesterday, listening to some of those speakers, I put some arrows into my quiver. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And in terms of leadership, I've been doing this Navy thing for about 28 years now, and I've had the opportunity to work for some incredible leaders. I've also had the opportunity, luckily not very often, to work for some not-so-great leaders. And in those 28 years, I can tell you the one attribute that was present in all those great leaders, and oddly enough was absent in those not-so-great leaders, another word that you've heard a little bit, is called a certain amount of humility. And I don't want anyone to think that humility can be associated with weakness. It's not. My message to the brigade is that it's possible to be both a bold and a humble leader all at the same time. And it comes down to your mindset as a leader. And I think the mindset that you need to have anytime you're in a leadership position is, I am here for them. Some of you may have experienced leaders who took the approach, they are here for me. And if you have, I think you would agree the one I'm espousing is a little better approach. And certainly that's the approach I've tried to take throughout my career. And as you heard, I've had command. In my bio, there's 2 commands, USS Roosevelt and most recently Destroyer Squadron 21. But actually, I've had command 3 times. Those 2, but also I had command of another ship. USS Roosevelt, guided missile destroyer, is that top ship. That was a planned command tour. And I can tell you, when I got to that ship, what I found was a crew that was incredibly engaged, firing on almost all cylinders, not perfect certainly, but I was coming into a very good situation. And so that mindset of I am here for them took on the kind of role of I'm going to find you the time and the resources to continue this trend. I wanted to maintain their confidence, but I almost felt like I had to work to ensure that they didn't get arrogant because things were going so well. And so that was kind of my role, finding the time, the resources to keep succeeding, and they took it and they ran with it, and it was beautiful to watch. That bottom ship, the way I got command of that ship, I got a call. I was 6 months from taking command of the destroyer squadron, and the admiral in charge of my carrier strike group called me on a Monday night. And he said, Rob, you're going to be taking command of USS Cowpens tomorrow morning at 0900. I said, okay, sir. Why, if you don't mind me asking? Because he was going to fire the commanding officer at 0855, and he wanted me walking on at 0900. He was firing the commanding officer because the ship had just gone through several inspections, one of them a kind of bow to stern safety inspection in which they achieved the lowest score that the safety center they said they had ever recorded. Almost every program on board had been deemed unsatisfactory, and the ship was deemed not safe to sail. And so, but that wasn't the only piece of the situation that I was walking into that morning. Because in kind of an unprecedented situation, 3 of the previous 4 commanding officers of that ship had been fired. The first one due to a caustic command climate, the second one due to an adulterous affair, and then the one that I was coming behind. The press, Navy Times, and others were calling it a cursed ship. And that's the situation I was walking into. And so, taking the approach, I am here for them, took on a little bit different flavor in that situation. Certainly there would have been some who said, go in there with your hair on fire, light a fire under them, get them moving. I will tell you what I saw in there, I think that was the last thing that crew needed, but even if maybe that would have been an appropriate approach, you've been hearing a lot about, the theme of this conference, which is inside-out leadership, knowing yourself, and that's not the kind of leader I've been. I'm a big believer in the concept of dance with the one that brought you. And if it's worked for you in the past, keep using it. And so my approach of I am here for them in this case, again, I had to find them those time and the resources. And listen, I made just like in USS Roosevelt, I made my expectations clear. But I also told them that I was going to, find them, again, the time and the resources to get what they needed. I was going to trust that they were the experts in their fields. And trust me, the folks in the Navy folks who have some experience will tell you a ship fails like that, there are people lining up to give them advice and help. And one of the things I told them is I'm going to give you the space to fix this. And luckily I got support from my admiral that we're going to keep everybody at bay. When you need something, you ask for it. And that's what I told the crew. If you need it, ask me, I'll get it for you. And whereas my messages in Roosevelt were trying to, keep that confidence, I was just trying to build confidence in this crew. This was a crew, again, I was saying things like, we're not going to let what's being said in the press define us as a ship and crew. I never would have dreamed of saying something like that in Roosevelt. Things like, when people come aboard the ship, they're certainly going to have preconceived notions, but our goal is to blow those preconceived notions out of the water. And when my admiral told me to take command, he said he thought it would be for 2 or 3 weeks until they could find a permanent relief. It ended up being 4 months. And I wouldn't trade those 4 months for anything. Some of the most rewarding times of my 28 years. And the way that crew responded was eye-watering. 3.5 months later, the inspectors came back aboard. Every program was deemed satisfactory, some of them being described as the best on the waterfront. And again, I don't take a lot of credit for that. I like to think I provided the environment and the tools for them to succeed, but they did the work. But again, when you're in that position, it's taking that I am here for them approach. You know, the second tenet of my intent is character. You know, Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines character as one of the attributes or features that make up and distinguish an individual. Well, my message to Merriam-Webster Dictionary is you didn't get it right. That's not a strong enough definition. Yes, it is one of the attributes, but I would argue your character is going to be the defining element of your success as a leader, as a follower, and I would argue the defining element of success in almost every aspect of your life. And you could ask the question, can someone be born with a perfect character? One that is unaffected by upbringing or environment, incapable of fault, not subject to any conceivable temptation? I would argue probably not. And if you look at our Naval Academy mission on the back of your programs, it starts with to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically. Develop, that's the operative word. It's a verb, it's an action verb. It's kind of making the assumption that morally, mentally, and physically, they're not coming in fully formed. And my message to them about their character is I want them to never feel like their character is fully formed. Because I think the moment any of us feel like we've arrived from a character standpoint, we are vulnerable. That's our most vulnerable time. And again, when it comes to your character, back to knowing yourself, knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, and mitigating for them. You know, a good example, I'm in the gym at 0500 every morning, and I've done that for 20 years, and everybody says, oh, you're so dedicated. Well, the truth is I know myself. And I know that if I try to schedule that workout for any time later in the day, I'm going to find a work-related excuse or some other reason not to do it. And so I force myself, that's a part of my character that I know, and so I mitigate for it. I force myself to do it that early. And I force by putting the alarm on the other side of the room, so I actually have to get moving in the morning. You know, if I was to ask the question, and I won't, of everybody in the room who thinks they're a good person and have a strong character, raise your hand. Again, don't raise your hands, because I know everybody would raise their hands. Maybe you think that, or you just don't want the person next to you to think you're a serial killer or something like that. But truthfully, it's not a useful question. Because whether we like it or not, our character is not defined by our self-image. It's defined by our choices and our actions. And that's why when it comes to your character, again, in Merriam-Webster, character is a noun, but I think in our lives we need to view our character as a verb. We're always working on it. And one of the ways to mitigate for maybe any strength or weaknesses that you have, and you heard it yesterday several times, surrounding yourself with good people. That's been my experience. And Mr. Rosansky yesterday morning in that amazing opening talk yesterday talked about that employee of Booz Allen who told him, I'm never leaving Booz Allen. Well, I had one of those moments in the United States Navy. And it happened on September 11, 2001. Certainly a day we all remember. But when American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon, I had my hand on the doorknob of our office spaces standing right there. And I had just seen planes going into the Trade Center, but when it happened, it felt, based on the way it sounded and felt, I thought it was a bomb. Luckily, the smoke got there a little before the flames, and everybody in my office was able to get out. And oddly enough, we had done an evacuation drill the week before. and we all had evacuated into the courtyard of the Pentagon. And that's where the drill had ended, and that's where everybody went. And I remember coming out into the courtyard with about 30 people at the same time. And it was almost like a choreographed dance. It was everybody ran out, and then nobody said a word, but almost in unison turned around and ran back into the building. And for the next several hours in this area, we tried our best to save as many people as we could. And I remember in one of the few quiet moments that day thinking to myself, these are the kind of people I'm going to keep surrounding myself with because I'm a better person when I'm around them. And certainly I had been open to options of getting out of the Navy at that point, but that's when it crystallized in my mind, just like that gentleman yesterday morning, I'm never leaving Booz Allen. Well, I'm not going to leave the Navy till they tell me to go home. Again, surrounding yourself with good people. And then the final tenet, accountability. You know, accountability has sometimes this negative connotation to it. And accountability is certainly not unique to the military, but it is absolutely fundamental to what we do in the military. And that quote you see up there is from a Wall Street Journal editorial back in the 50s when there was a collision between two Navy ships that resulted in quite a bit of loss of life. But I think the most important part of it is for men or women, for that matter, will not long trust leaders who feel themselves beyond accountability for what they do. And the important word in that is trust. And again, we see the negative aspects of accountability. That's USS Fitzgerald. Some of you may be aware of the collision they had several years ago with ACX Crystal, a almost 40,000-ton merchant vessel. So you can see that damage. Those merchant vessels have a huge bulbous bow, and that bulbous bow had punched a hole under the waterline into one of the berthing areas where the sailors that were killed, that's where they were. But that right there, I know it because I've had command of this class of ship as the captain's cabin. He was asleep when the collision happened. In fact, they had to break into his stateroom, and he was hanging outside here unconscious, and they had to pull him in. Now, some of you, I know, especially the folks in the military, have seen the investigation. You know, that commanding officer is scheduled for a court-martial for dereliction of duty. And it certainly is a result of the collision, but it goes to what led up to the collision and some things that were happening on that ship. But it's the ultimate accountability. I can tell you whatever happens to that commanding officer in that trial will pale in comparison to him losing 7 of his sailors. But that's the harsh reality of the accountability. It wouldn't have mattered if he was up on the bridge giving the orders to the helmsman or asleep in his rack. It didn't change his accountability. And his crew knew that. And again, that's the foundation of the trust. You know, I knew when I was in command of Roosevelt, it didn't matter if I was asleep in my rack, on the bridge, or anywhere on the ship. I was responsible for every aspect of it. If something went wrong, it was on me. You may ask, why do ship captains ever sleep? But it goes back to that word before, trust. But again, it's that accountability. It's the leader saying, yes, I'm asking you to be all in, but I'm all in too. And when they believe that, when they believe that you are a leader, I am here for you. When you show those character traits, when they believe this accountability, that you are taking accountability. And you've heard it yesterday, and I'll tell you again, if your subordinates believe all that and they feel it's genuine, they will follow you to the ends of the earth. So, again, I think the power we have in this kind of forum is the sharing of ideas. And I hope, whether it be in the keynote speakers or the breakout sessions, you do feel free to share your ideas. Again, that is the power of this. And you know, our midshipmen have done a wonderful job planning this conference. Could I get a round of applause for the planners of this event? It is truly exciting, obviously the largest one we've ever done, and we're excited for all of you to be here. So I think we're going to get a break until our first keynote, but I look forward to meeting as many of you as I can over the remaining time. It is going to warm up today. It's going to be a balmy 48. Compared to 7 below, that does qualify as balmy, but I hope you brought your rain gear based on the forecast for tonight and tomorrow morning. But again, enjoy the rest of the day, and thanks everybody for attending.
All right, you guys have a little bit over 10 minutes. Please be seated at 8:50.